Welcome to my short video on Dworkin's objections to welfarism. So Dworkin actually wrote two papers that relate to this idea of equality. The first is equality of what? Equality of welfare, where he criticizes welfarism, and that is where we find these two criticisms of welfarism. And the second is the paper Equality of Resources, where we find the beginnings of the articulation of the insurance scheme, although there he actually really only sketches the insurance scheme. He only later develops it in more detail in one of his other books, which I will put up on Luminous. So let's focus on the objections to welfarism, which are raised in the first paper, Equality of Equality of Welfare, and the objections are the objection of reasonable regret and the objection of expensive taste. So, if you recall, we previously talked about some of the problems that hedonistic interpretations of welfarism face. So to solve, and also some of the problems that desire satisfaction faces, right, as an alternative to hedonism, right? So we mentioned that one of the solutions that desire satisfaction theorists take is to adopt this idea of a comprehensive interpretation of desire satisfaction, where desire satisfaction relates to the overall level of desire satisfaction in one's life as a whole, right? To avoid this problem of desire satisfaction and addiction as a counterexample to desire satisfaction. So this seems a pretty plausible idea of preference or desire satisfaction, right? Because it avoids the problem of addiction. It also spells out potentially how we might understand what people desire or give priority to, right? It's the idea that we should give priority to what would help our life as a whole, right? But Dworkin has a specific objection to this particular interpretation of desire satisfaction, which we are going to look at next. And the objection is called the reasonable regret objection, for reasons that will be apparent shortly. And the argument starts off like that. One's success at attaining welfare should not be pegged to one's life plans, right? So this follows from the criticism of the desire satisfaction view, right? That if you simply peg it to your life plan, right, your subjective life plan, right, at the moment, then you run into problems of addiction, right? So how do you avoid this problem? You have the comprehensive interpretation, which says that preference or desire satisfaction should be pegged to your success of your life as a whole and not just what you desire or prefer at the specific moment. So that's premise one, right? Just follows from the very simple idea articulated by the comprehensive interpretation of desire satisfaction. Then the second premise is, but to assess whether one's life is successful as a whole, one needs a baseline. And the idea is something like, in order for you to tell whether your life as a whole goes well, you need some kind of baseline level of desire satisfaction or preference satisfaction in your life. Otherwise, how can you possibly tell how the shape of your life is going, right? If you have the baseline and then your life goes down and then your preference satisfaction or desire satisfaction goes down, then you can sort of tell, right, whether your life is going well or bad, right? It's relative to a certain baseline that you set. And Dworkin then argues, well, if you think about it properly, right, how do we come to the baseline? Right, we typically come to the baseline by something that maybe you a level of comfort or well-being that you achieved in a certain point of your life, right? And typically that would include, right, an account of your circumstances, your life, which would also include, right, whether or not you had a fair amount of resources, right? So for example, if you want to know whether your life as a whole has went well, right, you would sort of tell the story from the beginning of your life, your childhood, whether you were materially okay relative to other people, how did you fare, and then that sort of forms the baseline for which you compare the rest of your life. And that would involve an account of the material resources you had, right, and whether or not that is fair. And then with that baseline, you can reasonably regret your life relative to the baseline, right? So you can say, well, previously I had this baseline and then life turned out to be something else, or I made certain decisions or choices and then something or other went wrong or went well, right? Whatever the story might be. And if that's the case, right, if you need the baseline and the baseline already includes an account of a fair amount of resources, then what that means is that the welfarist account of justice already presupposes an account of fair resources, and therefore it cannot serve as an independent account of how to distribute benefits and burdens fairly. Right? This sort of follows from premise 3. Right? If in order to assess whether one's life is going well as a whole, you need a baseline, but that baseline must include a story about your circumstances, and your story about the circumstances includes some evaluation of the resources that you had at hand during that time. Then it seems that already welfarism presupposes some independent standard distribution of benefits and burdens. So therefore, welfarism cannot give us a complete account of what fair resources would look like. And that is the reasonable regret objection. And you will see how welfarists respond to it in the work of Arneson when you read Arneson. Now let's move on to the more famous objection, the expensive taste objection. And the expensive taste objection is something like that. Now assume that we want, like the welfarist goal here is to ensure equality of welfare, right? Meaning that everyone has the same amount of utility through distribution. So what that means would be, for example, we redistribute wealth somehow to ensure that Joel gets 1,000 UTILs, Hannah gets 1,000 UTILs, Amos gets 1,000 UTILs, Nicholas gets 1,000 UTILs, and everyone in the class, for example, gets 1,000 UTILs. Now let's imagine a person called Phil, right? So after this redistribution, Phil has 1,000 UTILs, and from the money that we gave him. Now using this money, right, whatever this X amount of money is, right, Phil then develops certain kinds of more expensive taste, right? So to give this concrete illustration, instead of drinking coffee at the coffee shop or kopitiam, right, Phil goes to the specialty coffee shop to drink some lattes, right? So he moves from kopi to $6 lattes, $7, $8, maybe with oat milk, whatever, right? Then he also moves from drinking simple tiger beer to drinking expensive wine, right? Or craft beer, or if you don't drink alcohol, just swap this out for drinking $1 tea to $10 kombuchas, You get the picture. Then we can also tell the story a bit, fill it up a bit more, right? Instead of eating $2 nasi lemak at Ananas Cafe, right? Phil moves to eating $30 nasi lemak, right? And instead of using China imported earphones, he gets the best quality earphones. And instead of living in a HDB, he has decided that he wants to rent, for example, a nice apartment. For example, the apartment that James Dyson bought, the penthouse, right? So in short, right, once Phil has developed his expensive taste, I call him Alan, right? But Alan or Phil, whoever. It seems that he will no longer be happy with the kopitiam kopi, the $2 Ananas Cafe nasi lemak, or the typical HDB flat. But if we want to ensure that we move back to equality of welfare after he has cultivated these tastes, then we would have to take more of our resources to keep him at the level of welfare enjoyed by the rest of us, right? But that would mean that the rest of us have a smaller allocation of resources, and this seems to be a very counterintuitive result, right? Now, two things to note, right? So first of all, that is the bulk of the expensive taste objection, right? The idea seems to be that we are kind of, in a way, held hostage to people who cultivate expensive taste, right? But note that this problem arises even before, in the example that I gave, right? The person cultivates expensive taste after we have established equality of welfare. But notice that the problem exists even before that, right? It might be that it would require a significant diversion of resources from the rest of society to satisfy those with expensive tastes in order to get us to equality of welfare first, right? Which would also seem counterintuitive. Another parallel problem, which G.A. Cohen also mentions, and which Dworkin also mentions, is that someone might have what we can call cheap, expensive taste, in the sense that someone would need only a smaller amount of money in order to be satisfied than other people, right? And if we want equality of welfare, then we would just need to divert a smaller amount of income or resources to that person in order to get us to equality of welfare. But that just seems to be counterintuitive, right? That we would pay less, we would give that person less, redistribute less to that person, right? That seems, to some people, seems that there's something wrong with that. So that is just a brief overview of the two key objections that Dworkin has. First of all, the reasonable regret objection, and then the more famous expensive taste objection, and we will review them and how both Cohen and Dworkin respond to these objections in class. See you then.